Thank you for being here tonight. The inaugural Chip Miller Amyloidosis Foundation dinner at the Carlisle Ford Nationals. We have a dinner like this at one of our other shows in August, but we appreciate you being here tonight for this very special dinner and our guest of honor, Mr. Steve Saleen. Exactly, thank you. So we all know Steve. He's the handsome man in the middle here wearing the sport coat. The gentleman to his right is Bob Smith. He's the event marketing manager with Saleen. And on his left, it's Fred Blum, director of retail sales. Although I was told most times Fred does actually nothing and somehow still garners a paycheck. So that's great work if you can get it. Steve, of course, the founder and CEO of the Saleen brand. So again, give our panel a wonderful round of applause. Now, Steve, you've been part of the Carlisle Ford Nationals on and off for quite some time. What does this show mean to you and the Saleen brand?
Well, yeah, first of all, I want to thank for having us here. This is a great event. The Miller family, I want to thank you all for all of your efforts that you have put in over the years. It was a good thing that we started this program at the turn of the century, the 1900th century. It seems like it has been 123 years, but...
That was how many degrees it was today, is 123.
Yeah, so, but this, again, we travel to all the shows all over the world, literally, and this, I have to say, this is one of the best, if not the best show that gets put on, and you guys do a heck of a job, so let's give them a round of applause.
And Steve, you said it yourself, you travel to a lot of shows. What do you enjoy about mixing and mingling with the enthusiasts, whether it's here at Carlisle or any of the other events you go to?
Well, first of all, I want to go on the record. We don't like coming to Pennsylvania. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So this is, they have a chocolate factory, if you didn't know, not too far from here.
Hershey.
So it's worth coming to. But the... We have enjoyed, I think, the enthusiast crowd that we get basically on the East Coast. This is probably the spot that everyone talks about coming to. And certainly over the years, it has been, we have been very well welcomed. We get a very big crowd, as you can see tonight. And then it's great that we're doing it for a great cause. I think Lance and the foundation that we're doing for the disease that I can't pronounce that we even practiced on, but the fact that we are doing this for charities, and the fact that we're doing the giveaway car for the Cruise for a Cure with the cancer on this, it is worthwhile, and it all hits to it. There's the people all around the world. I lost my best friend a couple weeks ago because of cancer, so doing charity and having this event tonight, I think, is a great thing.
Thank you very much, Steve. Yes. And chipmiller.org is the website if you want to know more about amyloidosis. As Lance said earlier, oftentimes it's way too late before you learn a little bit. So chipmiller.org, and again, we thank you. So, Steve, let's get into our roster of questions. Are you ready to go?
Yes, go ahead. These are random questions. We'll see. Hopefully I can answer them, and we'll see how it goes.
Well, everybody gets into the car hobby for some reason or the other. Maybe it was a family member, maybe it was a friend or a particular model of car, or even a Hot Wheel toy that people would have had as a kid. What was the spark that got you interested in cars?
I'm supposed to answer that in 20 words or less?
No, there's no limit. Take your time.
Well, I grew up and was born and raised in Southern California, and I grew up really in the car culture through the 50s and the 60s. I can tell you where I was first in high school when I saw my first Mustang. I know exactly. I was walking across the quad, and we saw it go up the street. And my dad was into cars. I think that's really where it really starts. And he was buying cars, fixing them up and selling them. And I just gravitated to helping him do that. It was everything from fixing the engines to fixing the suspension, painting. I've done my fair share of pinstriping on this, and I just really fell in love with cars. And when I grew up, I actually wanted to be a race car driver. So that was the thing that I really pursued.
So many people have been influenced by family members. We know that Lance was. Anybody else in the room get turned on to the car hobby because of a family member? Yeah. So some early car experiences, Steve. I understand that you wrecked a GT350 and you lost a race to an El Camino. You wanted to be a race car driver, but who loses to an El Camino?
Yeah, that's a Chevy. Can you believe it? Well, again, I was fortunate enough. I bought a 1969. I bought my first Mustang, which happened to be a GT350, and I really started fixing it up. And grew up in Whittier. We would cruise down Whittier Boulevard, and that was the place to go if you wanted to actually race. But I also used my car for work. I worked for my dad. We were in the pet industry, and I had to do deliveries in Southern California to different pet stores. And what I ended up doing on one trip on this is I put 20 50-pound bags of dog food. I could get that into my Mustang. And I cruised up the freeway. We come off the freeway in Glendale, and it's at a stoplight, and this hot El Camino showed up ready to take me on, and well, I couldn't resist. And the light turned green. We revved our engines, the light turned green, and away we went. And I got maybe 10 feet and blew up the motor because I was carrying too much weight. And the El Camino just really left me, and I had to call my dad to come and pick me up and finish delivering the dog food. So that was one of my first starts.
So really, it was the dog food's fault?
Yes, yeah.
Of course. So you did get a start in racing. What were you driving when you started, and do you remember what you learned to drive when you first got into racing?
Well, from my standpoint, the one thing that I was able to do is I kept working on my car, and I took it. Eventually, you build up the street car to where you really can't operate it on the street. The exhaust system is too loud. You sit too low to the ground. I sort of had, at one point in time, I had the American Graffiti where the police would pull me over for equipment violations. And I would reach over and hit the glove box, and all these tickets would fall out because I was too low, too loud, too much of everything. And but I decided I would go racing, and I had the opportunity. We lived at the base of a canyon, and in Whittier, Turnbow Canyon. And I was working on dropping the oil pan to finish a different windage tray to keep the oil pressure up. And I had put in a roll cage in it. I had the racing bucket seats, everything that you would want to see on a race car. And one night, specifically, it was actually July 6, 1971, right about dusk, is I took the car up the canyon and had got to the top of the hill and I think I fixed it. So I said to myself, I'm going, okay, I'm really going to push it all the way now. And I knew the canyon road really well, and at the top of the hill, I always carried my racing helmet when I drove the car on the street. So I put my racing helmet on and revved the motor and started coming down the canyon. And coming down the canyon, I was really going very fast. And you get to a point in the canyon where if you look ahead, I can see that there's no cars coming up. So I can cross the double yellow line and apex and carry, at the time, fourth gear flat out. And so I glanced ahead, saw it was clear, came across the double yellow line. Somehow I missed a family in a station wagon with dad and mom and daughter and son and a big German Shepherd in the back coming around the corner. And I was going to have a head-on with them. Fortunately, my reflexes were fast enough to where I made a hard right and I missed them. But unfortunately, I was making a hard right in a corner that is a hard left. And just like the movies, I went right through the guardrail off a 200-foot cliff, and I thought I was actually driving the car down the cliff, but it was just the front tires were hitting some of the bushes and trees. And I nosed it into the riverbed below at about 200 feet. I blacked out for a second. My head went in through the windshield, but fortunately I had my helmet on. I was able to get up and eventually worked my way back to the top. The driver of the station wagon, the dad had stopped, and he's going, "Oh my God, oh my God." And my first words to him, as I remember this vividly, was, "Boy, I bet I scared you." And he goes, "No, sit down." I go, "No, I think I'm okay." But then he says, "Oh, you're bleeding out of your ear." And I touch my ear, and yeah, sure enough. So from now on, any of the wisecracks I hear about brain damage, I'm not going to talk to you about it. So, but I ended up spending a week in the hospital for observation, and I didn't break anything. I mangled my left knee. But at that point in time, I decided, yeah, if I'm going to do that, I'll keep it on the racetrack. So fortunately, I've only had that one accident on the street.
So what made you want to make the jump from racing to producing cars for sale for the general consumer? Obviously, you've shared some early racing stories. Sounds like maybe one of the first animals you hit with a car was a fish. So share that one.
So I graduated from production cars into Formula cars. I ran against, in Formula Atlantic, was kind of the proving ground. And the crowd that I ran with from Formula One was Gilles Villeneuve, who drove for Ferrari, K.K. Rosberg, who won the Formula One championship. His son just won it a few years ago. In the IndyCar side, it was Bobby Rahal and Danny Sullivan. And actually, I was teammates for a number of races with Rick Mears. And back in those days in the late 70s, mid to late 70s, you either then went from there and you graduated into IndyCar or Formula One. But that didn't open initially for me. But Pontiac Motor Company offered me a full-time ride, so I decided I would lower my standards from open wheel back into sedans, and I took the job with Pontiac. And it was there on the weekends. This was 1982. So that year we did win the championship in Trans Am racing for Pontiac. And Ford Motor Company was just coming back out of from racing, because if you looked at the Ford versus Ferrari in 1970, Henry Ford II quit cold turkey all racing for Ford Motor Company, and it didn't start again until 1982. So we were beating Ford on the track, and at the time I got to know the guys from Ford, and they said, "Yeah, we're setting up a new division called SVO, Special Vehicle Operation," and they said that we're going to do special edition vehicles. And I said, "Which one?" And they said, "Hey, we're going to do a Mustang." I said, "Good choice." But then, I said, "What model?" And they go, "Well, we're going to do a 4-cylinder turbo." And I kind of went, ooh, I think the American public would rather have a V8. And with the work that I had been doing with Pontiac on their street cars, they said, "Well, Steve, if you had interest in it, we might support you in doing a V8 version." So that's how I got involved with Ford, because in 1983, I quit my position with Pontiac and started the company with Saleen, which obviously marks our 40th anniversary this year. So that's how I got started.
Ford had so many cars out at that time. Why the Mustang? What attracted you to the pony power?
Well, what's there not to like about a Mustang? I would say, I think America has had a love affair since the pony cars, and the Mustang created the whole pony car segment. And it captured, I think, from a sports and a handling, but the overall look of the car, the affordability, all of that, I think, just has worked into the reason why Ford is killing all their other cars, but they've kept the Mustang alive.
So a couple of more questions focused on the Mustang and in fact some of the cars in the room. Starting with 87001, the car that's here in the room. Can it be considered maybe the first street version Saleen to have motor enhancements from Saleen Autosport?
Yes, when I started the company, we concentrated mostly on the suspension, heavy into the aerodynamics. The Fox body platform, as everyone knows, had a big engine. It was a light car. So had plenty of power, it just couldn't control it. And so we started doing that. But then as in 84, 85, 86, we realized the opportunity to increase the horsepower. And again, we're a little bit different. And this is what a lot of people didn't realize, is that we have to sell a vehicle off of a dealership showroom, you have to be a fully certified car. And the only way you do that is you have to pass all the tests that all of the major manufacturers have to go through. And so that was to change the horsepower rating. I then had to start going through the full emission requirements that any of the major manufacturers, and that 87 and 88 is when we actually did that development that ended up being in 89 with the SSC, our first fully certified car from an emission standpoint.
So continuing on this car, we understand it was originally a press car to showcase the new body style, and it traveled tracks with maybe 87 or so race cars, and then it was used for testing and finally converted for SSC federal certification, as you mentioned. Can you expand at all on any of the aspects through the car's history? Do you remember some of the specifics with it?
Well, I remember I probably didn't get any good points for this. We took the car, all of the emission testing back then was done in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I remember we took the car to Ann Arbor, Michigan, is where you actually go into this special room on this. You hook up the tailpipe, and it goes into these clear plastic bags. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then you get in the car, you start it up, and they drive it through a drive cycle that they trace to get, is how, back then, how you were doing emission testing. And when we took the car in for the emission testing, I remember the car is all hooked up, and there was about 5 or 6 of the EPA guys that have to observe all of this. And they were all smoking like fiends. I mean, I could barely breathe in the room. And I made the snide comment, it was like, do you see anything ironic about this, is the fact that we're worried about this and the room's all filled. That did not go over well, and that was the last time I decided to go to a test, but that was the first time we took the car through a test.
So let's move on to the S351 program. Do you remember how it came to be, along with what happened after that?
Well, the whole mantra that we do is we look at improving the car from a performance standpoint. And in doing that, the Fox body had a lot of horsepower, a lightweight car, had a lot of body flex to it. So we spent more time dealing with the transmission and the aerodynamics and some of the interior, but not so much the horsepower, because the power to weight ratio was very good for that. When the new next generation Mustang came out, that flipped. That ended up being a very strong body, a much better suspension, but a much heavier car. And to propel the car fast enough, we realized that the motor that was in it would not work, and we needed a bigger motor that had a lot more torque, which is why we decided we would start with a V6 tear out the engine and all the electronics and go through the certification to get a V8 351 certified for it. And then we decided, well, you always need more horsepower, so we supercharged it as well. I remember Motor Trend, we were on the front cover of one of the Motor Trend magazines, was the highest horsepower in the US that was certified, and that was 495 horsepower at the time.
All right, thanks. Great to hear these stories. And we have one more on our list of Saleen-specific cars, the Saleen N20. Now, something happened with it and the California Air Resources Board and maybe a fine, and it had something to do with cars that came out of the Galpin Ford area, maybe a blue one and a black one. Is this a story you want to share? Do you remember this?
This is, where's Greg Wackett? This would be his, wherever he went. But yeah, so through the years, we've put out other vehicles. Back when the foreign Rice rockets were popular, we saw a big opportunity here to take the Ford Focus and make it into a Saleen vehicle, and we were very proud of it. We dealt with, again, the aerodynamic suspension. For this particular application, though, because it was very popular, and still is to a certain extent, is that the nitrous oxide we would hook up to where a person could not spend a lot of time in many, but they could actually, in the aftermarket, turn it in to where they could have the car as a nitrous oxide vehicle. And we sold the car incomplete from that standpoint through the Ford dealers, but somehow CARB, the California Air Force board, didn't really appreciate that, even though we never hooked it up. And one day they actually raided all of our Saleen dealers in Southern California, or actually in California, and tagged all of the cars that we had as illegal. And then I got into a big argument. I said, well, what's illegal about it? They said that you have a nitrous oxide. And okay, show me how it works then. You guys are so smart. And they couldn't actually show me how it worked because we didn't actually put nitrous oxide in the car. We just had an empty bottle. We hooked up some of the line to make it look like it, but you actually had to buy the trigger and everything else in the aftermarket to make it work. And so they got kind of red-faced when they actually realized that it would look like it had nitrous, but it actually did not have nitrous on it. But that did not sit well with them, so they fined me, the company at the time. And so that only cost us $850,000 fine, which is, I think, the largest single make fine that's in the history of California. So that was a very expensive lesson. And the reason that they used it is that I was tempting the customer to break the law. That was the official reason for it. So it was a very expensive lesson, not the only lesson I've gone through with the CARB, as any manufacturer has their badge of the different run-ins, but that was today I can look and smile at it. At the time, maybe not so much.
Congratulations, maybe? Let's move on. Let's move on. So for those of you who may not be familiar, there's also a Saleen S7. Describe that. What is the S7?
Well, the S7 is our version of the supercar. It came about, I had taken the, and you're going to see more about this, but back in the late 90s, I took our Mustangs. I had a race team with Tim Allen, the Saleen Allen race team, and we took our cars around the world to race at various tracks here in the U.S. and then also over in Europe. And it was over in Europe that we were, I found that some of the other cars, the McLarens and the Porsches, had a lot more development than what we could get through the Mustangs. And we even took the Mustangs and raced them at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. And that was a great learning and experience, but I did not like, we won a couple races, but we were not as dominant as we were here in the US. And I realized that we really had developed the Mustang for about as far as you could go in the platform to compete with these top-line sports cars. So we decided in 1999 that we would develop our own supercar, and that was a clean sheet of paper, and we could do whatever we wanted to, and we built, in 9 months, we designed and came up with our first supercar, which we showed at Pebble Beach in August of 2000. And we had a racing version of it, and the racing version has been very successful. We ran a practice run in 2000, and then we had two car teams, 2 S7s compete in North America and 2 in Europe. And all 4 in 2001 won their respective championships. And from that day on, the S7 has been the most successful supercar to date, in the respect that it has won at every major racetrack in the world with no exception. And I'm talking from Shanghai, China, Mount Fuji, Japan, Laguna Seca, Watkins Glen, New York, Daytona, Sebring, Silverstone, England, Barcelona, Spain, Imola, Italy, Nürburgring, Germany, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Bahrain, and we finally won the 24 Hours of Le Mans with the S7.
All right.
In fact, we actually have more race wins than Ferrari, Lamborghini, and McLaren combined, all by privateers with the S7.
Well, the S7 certainly has a lot of track success, but what about some of the challenges in getting a supercar to the street?
Well, again, it's basically what we have been doing all the years with the Mustang, except in some cases it's a little bit easier because we designed it that way to begin and understanding what we have to have it as a street vehicle. And it's, when we went for our first emission test back in Ann Arbor again for it, the car came out, was better than a Honda Civic as far as tailpipe emissions. So we were very proud of that and that we could get that level of horsepower. We are building a couple more S7s, actually one more. The last one today is boosting over 1,500 horsepower, and we've revised a few things, and then we're done with the mold here for forever.
All right, so look for the new version soon. How about your involvement with the GT40 and its development? Can you share some stories or a story that stands out with that?
Well, we have one is the Gulf version is in the back. When we came out with the S7, a lot of people may not know that we with the S7 we were being very successful. Ford at the same time was trying to do their own supercar, and they ended up deciding that they would do a replica of the Ford GT that you saw in Ford versus Ferrari movie. And when Bill Ford drove the prototype on stage, that was held together with just paper mache and wire on that. But by the time they got done with the press week at Detroit, they had, Ford said, and had come to me, said, Steve, we actually need to look at making this a reality on it to go into production. So we ended up building all of the Ford GTs. We did the final design work. Camilo was the main designer, but we did the final design work. We did all of the certification for it, and I put in a factory back in Detroit area where we did the complete ground up of the build of the Ford GT and shipped them directly to the Ford dealer, complete with the Ford window sticker on it and the Ford badging, all as private label. So we were very pleased with that car.
Very cool, very cool. So And we've heard a lot from you tonight, Steve. I know you have a couple of guys here on your left and your right. I think Bob has some things he wants to say, right?
Actually, the one thing I would add on the Ford GT program was was in 2004 when we got it. We had a race with one of the race teams over an FIA GT championship at Imola, Italy. Now, Imola, for those people that don't know, that is Ferrari's home track. It is literally a stone's throw from the world headquarters of Ferrari. And this is when, at this point in time, is when Ferrari is dominating with Michael Schumacher as the main driver, has for years before and after been dominant to where they were beating every other manufacturer in the world. And they had a weekend between F1 races, so Ferrari decided that they would introduce the new Maserati MC12, which in essence was the Ferrari Enzo on steroids. And to do that, they would have their Formula One team actually run it at Imola, their home track. It's called the Dino Ferrari track, on this with their Formula One drivers, without except for Michael Schumacher. As it turned out, we had a couple teams that were in Europe competing. One particular German team that was pretty good, and the whole series converged at the Imola racetrack. In honor of bringing out the Maseratis and the Ferraris, Ferrari decided that they would invite all of the European press, all the dignitaries in to roll this out. And to celebrate this, they put in a major Circus du Soleil 3-ringer circus tent in the paddock, and they had brought in the famous Italian chefs. They had a full orchestra all weekend. When I say that, maybe it was only 24 pieces, but it still was pretty impressive. And they even ran on the Friday and Saturday, they ran a supermodel runway show on showing the latest Italian fashions. And then, as conversely, was the German team that was running the Saleen S7. On it had a Winnebago and a hibachi over in the corner of the paddock area. And then the day of the race, the Luca de Mademoiselle, who was the who took over after Enzo passed away, running Ferrari, showed up with his entourage. And I tell you that you thought the Rolling Stones had rolled into town, because it was masses of crowd and everything. And I would say, arguably, other than the Pope, he was the second most popular person in all of Italy. And he was there to watch his Ferraris and Maseratis win their debut race. As it turned out, the Ferrari was on the pole. We had a Saleen S7 second. We had a Saleen S7 third, and then the two Maseratis that had sandbagged, and they were right behind us, and then the rest of the 40 field was behind. The race was live on Eurosport TV, and it started. It was an endurance race. It was a 4-hour-long race. And the race started, a Ferrari led for about a dozen laps. Then the S7 and the two Maseratis kind of came through to lead the pack for the next several hours. As the race wound down, you realize that this was actually going to be a race between the two Maseratis and the one Saleen S7. And it came down into the last pit stop where all three cars came in. They did a driver change. They filled it up with fuel and put fresh tires on it. And now the endurance race became a how fast can the car go, a sprint race to the end. And we were fortunate to know to have it to where the Saleen S7, we were able to lap one of the Maseratis, and we finished 45 seconds in front of the other Maseratis. Ended up winning the race on Ferrari's home track in front of his crowd. And Luca had to,
Yeah.
and Luca had to get up in front of the mass crowd and the television audience and say that we were no match for Saleen. The next day, the newspapers in Italy had two major ones, had the headlines was Ferrari loses to Saleen, was on one newspaper, and the other one said Ferrari, no match for Saleen. It was their worst loss that they've received in 4 years that they had been running. So it was a big embarrassment for them. As things continued though, is that Christmas, I received a Christmas card from Ferrari, again congratulating me on spoiling their debut on their home track. And I thought, well, that's good. As we got the Ford GT program, I decided that I would tour a lot of the smaller specialized manufacturers around the world. And so I went to both plants at Aston Martin. I went to the Jaguar plant up in England as well. I went to Lotus. I went to Bugatti. I went to Lamborghini, which opened open arms and into it. And I got on my tour, I had set up to visit Ferrari. And we got to the front door of Ferrari at the front gate. We walked in, announced us. The guy looked around and goes, well, I see no credentials here for you, Mr. Saleen. And I go, well, look again. We made some phone calls to verify that they knew we were coming. As it turned out, for some reason, they had no credentials for me and would not allow me in through the gate of Ferrari. So I ended up eating across the street at the Enzo Ferrari cafe. We stayed in the Red Planet Hotel next to the facility, and I bought a little Formula One race car for my visit out of their gift shop. But we ended up with no visit to Ferrari, so that was very disappointing. As we progressed with the Ford GT program and the certification, we had the opportunity to have to verify the top speed of the Ford GT. We decided that we would actually do the top speed run at Nardo Test Track over in Italy. And Nardo Test Track, if you've been there, is not too far from Ferrari. And so after we completed with the red and white Ford GT, which was 205 mile an hour and change as the official, I instructed our driver to drive down the street to the front gate of Ferrari, rev the motor, drop the clutch, and left 2 long imprints through their driveway all the way down, but giving him the right salute of the way going out. So that was my treat to Ferrari.
Steve Saleen goes to Italy. Wow. All right, well, Steve, that's a lot of great information. Wasn't that awesome? Yeah. But as I was saying, there's 2 other guys up here that know a little something about something. And Bob Smith, to Steve's right, he's got some stories to share about the early days in Brea. Now, do you remember the early days, Bob?
Yeah, believe it or not, I can actually still remember that, but...
It's Bob Smith, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you for those opening remarks, Steve. I feel very fortunate to be here. I am but a very small part of this story. One of the things I want to share with you is that early on, Fred and I were doing a show in Anaheim, California sometime, and we had a tent, we had fake grass, we had a couple of Mustangs, we made it look like a racetrack, we had all kinds of stuff going on. And people would come, and I think that was, about our 10th anniversary. So we're doing 10th anniversary at a show in Anaheim, and people would come and go, how long, is this new? How long you guys have been in business? 10 years. Really? I never heard of you. So the story is you think you're doing such a great job in marketing, you think everybody knows who you are because you're beating that drum all the time, and the truth is sometimes it falls on deaf ears. But this story goes back to Brea, California, when we were building cars in the body shop of Brea Ford, correct? Yeah. So it was a small office. I had fortunately had joined Steve late in '86, went to a couple races with him. Liz actually agreed to bring me on as part of the sports marketing team. And so it was like, okay, the race season's over. Well, you can't just stay home. You got to have something to do. Come down to Southern California. You can help us. So I'm down there. Fred had already joined the company. And we're in this small office. And Steve says, well, I'm sorry, Bob, but you'll just have to work out of the conference room. So there were like 4 or 5 of us working out of the conference room at that time. And it's like, I can't get anything done here. I need my own office. So I go in the warehouse, and there's this little chain link cage that used to be in the back of the warehouse that somebody else used for something. And I said, well, Steve, is it okay if I make an office back there? And he says, well, I don't have any furniture, but there's a phone line back there. So I put pallets together, and Pete Evanaugh and I shared a desk of pallets in a tool cage. That's where we did marketing work for Steve. So I'm there, and it's been a long week, and I think it was Thursday or Friday, and we were getting ready to all go to lunch. So Steve says, well, come on, we'll go. And it's Steve and Fred and Liz and I. And so we're talking on the way over in the car. So how did everything go today, Bob? I said, well, you know, I think I'm going to be on the cover of People magazine. And Liz looks at me and says, what? Yeah, I've been on the phone all morning. I'm sure I'm going to be on the cover of People magazine. She said, why are you going to be on the cover of People magazine? And I proudly announced, well, I think I'm a candidate for the most sexiest man alive. And she says, sexiest man alive, what are you talking about? I said, well, I've been on the phone all morning. I've been talking to car dealers. I've been talking to sponsors. I've been talking to the press. And everybody I talk to is trying to screw me. True? I had to clean it up a little bit, but.
Yeah, I'm sure it started with S. Yeah.
But the truth is that one of the things that Steve shared with us very early in our inauguration with the company was what Steve has called the consumer franchise. And that is everybody that's here. And that is something, it's you people and what you do to support the company, what you've done to support us through events, what you've done to support us through apparel, what you've done to support us in having events and inviting us here. And that consumer franchise is more valuable than all the cars put together because it's made up of people, and it's made up of attitudes, and it's made up of tradition. So I'd like to have you all give yourself a round of applause.
And it makes perfect sense because Steve would always have the passion for all things automotive, but without maybe the purpose, and that is bringing something to the consumer. It'd be a completely different position in life right now.
But you can see why we put Sexy Bob in a chain link cage for his office.
It's like Milton from Office Space. They just kept moving him to the side. So, Fred, you're here. Have we saved the best for last, Fred?
Well, I hope so. I'm not quite dead yet, but I'm getting close. Yeah.
Fred
That would be the
Blum.
last.
Fred Blum, ladies and gentlemen, he's the director of retail sales. And Fred tells me he's got 2 good stories he wants to share, and we're gonna start forward and then go backwards. So, talk about Indy 500 qualifying 1989.
That's the one. But first, you have to understand that it is passion that drives this company. And it's passion that you all share in this room, and you can't put a finger on it. It's an intangible. I met Steve first at a race in Riverside, California. Just a group of guys of my own, friends of ours. We'd had bought a brand new 1985 Mustang. It was in '84. We ordered it from Ford. No power windows, no AC, no nothing. It was just a bare bones white car, and we were going to go racing, just a group of amateurs. But we were going to go racing in a professional series called the Playboy Series. We done the first race, Riverside, California. Never been at the track before. We went down. We finished very, very well when you consider that the SCCA, who was the sanctioning body at the time, had lumped all of the cars together, including the Corvettes, all in one class. And we finished, I think, 5th overall. we thought we'd won the Indy 500. We're going to get to that point because the point is where we started from and where we got to at the Indy 500 in a period of about 5 or 6 years. My wife Diane sitting here in the front, she was there that night. We had finished the race and we were having some beers standing at the pit wall, and this gentleman walks up and says, "My Steve Saleen." I've heard the name, I didn't know him. He said, "You guys did really, really well. We were the top finishing Mustang." And he said, "Who built the car?" Well, the group of these guys standing right in front of you are the people that built the car. He said, "I'd like to come and talk to you about building us a race car." So if you had bought a book today, I pointed out to you that the actual first race car is in that book that we built for Steve back in the day. Because he sent a bunch of parts and a car up to where I was at, Rancho Cordova, California. And we put that car together and we went on our merry way. Now, fast forward, I joined Steve full-time in January of 1986. Prior to that, during '85, we communicated, we saw each other at the racetrack, but we supported one another, but we really didn't get into business until January of 1986. And now I'm going to fast forward all the way to Indy 500, 1989. In that period, we won a championship with the Mustangs in 1987. The trucks were doing well. The Ranger trucks were doing well in their series. We could do no wrong. And one of the things that propelled us into IndyCar racing was Steve. And I've watched Steve, I've watched drivers. I have been the strategist at Le Mans and other places like that for Steve's teams. And I can tell a good driver from a driver that's just killing a car. Steve doesn't do that. Steve drives the car with a great deal of finesse. I think that's from going over the Armco, on the canyon. But so we decided we could do the IndyCar deal. And so we are fast forwarding. We are confident. I'm telling you, we are more brazen than any small group of people you can find. We can do anything. So Liz and I, standing on the pit wall, qualifying day, Steve's in a car that cannot really compete with the other cars at this track at this time. It was a 2 or 3 year old March with a Cosworth in it. Goal was 212 point something miles an hour in his qualifying runs. And if you watched Indy this last year with Ray Hall, the whole thing that went on at the end, it gives you some idea how important it is to qualify for that race. I don't care who you are. So we're out there for the last hurrah, and Steve's in the car. They've got this thing dialed in so that there's absolutely no downforce on it because you couldn't have any drag. And Liz and I are standing on the pit wall, and Steve comes around there and he's doing really, really well and just gets to that turn 4. And I'm telling you, if you could twitch an eye, you've made a mistake. And that's all it took. The back end of that car snapped like that, and that thing went into turn 4 wall at well over 200 miles an hour. And you could have heard a pin drop in that track. Or maybe I was just deaf at that moment. All right? But Liz was holding onto my arm like this as we're standing on the pit wall, and we both watched that car slide down the track right towards the entrance to pit lane and come to a stop. I thought, well, I'm going to be looking for a job. But all of a sudden, I saw the steering wheel come off, and he throws the steering wheel off. I went, oh, he's moving. And this is a move you'll catch later. We're going to have a little story. Steve has this first instinct is he just takes his head and goes like that, like, shit. Excuse me, but that's what he does. I could see his head bob up, and I said, he's fine. Well, they had to cut him out of the car, put him in an ambulance, take him to the helicopter, take him to the Trammell Center in Indianapolis, rooftop landing, and their emergency center there for the IndyCar drivers is on the roof, top floor. Liz and I jump in the rental car, and we're tearing over to that track. And I've never seen a woman as calm and as still as she was at that I expected her to be screaming bloody murder, and she just sat there. We drove into the hospital, parked the car, got out, ran into the elevators, and she's still as calm as can be. And we have to go all the way to the top floor. And you mentioned earlier about his problem, and the reason he lost the race to the El Camino was because it was the dog's fault. Hang on. We ride up the elevator, we open up to the emergency center, and there's almost no one in there. All these equipment, all these machines, and then there's this couple nurses, and then there's this, curtain around this gurney. I can see the wheels underneath. And we get out and we walk over to the side of the curtain, and suddenly Liz says, "Go in there." I'm standing there and I pull the curtain back a little bit and I step in there, and here's Steve. They got his race uniform off and he's just in there in his Nomex underwear. His eyes are closed. He looked like he was dead. His face was all puffed up from the impact. He had a huge shunt. I mean, his whole body was basically going to be black and blue. But he's laying there on the gurney. His eyes are closed, staring, looking straight up at the ceiling. Only his eyes were closed. And I went over. I didn't know exactly what to do, but now Liz is right behind me. I went over that I was going to touch him, and all of a sudden his eyes opened up, and he looked right at me, and he said, "This is all your fault." So the dog was the fault at the first time, and this time it was all my fault, and we knew he was going to be fine. But the point of the matter is that he never gave up on it. The next race was Detroit, I believe. After that, he was back in the car. I mean, I've seen black and blue marks but where his straps were on his chest he was black and blue. He couldn't hardly, it was so stiffened from that impact that he could hardly move. He had broken a tooth. His helmet went forward far enough and stretched everything far enough where his helmet actually got pushed back and broke a tooth off. And that's being strapped into one of those Indy cars with those 5-point harnesses. And I've had the greatest respect for this man over the years. Like I said, that's all started back in 1985, and here we are 40 years later almost, 84. And I'm still around. I still support them. I still support their family. They support my family in more ways than one. And I enjoy what I do just being here, because as Bob Smith said, it has been a philosophy of this company from the very beginning that everyone here is a group like yours are part of our consumer franchise. It's a hard way to think about it, but you can only build a brand by those people that you touch, and that those people that will touch you. It becomes a two-way relationship. This group here, and there's many, many like this around the world, that are Saleen enthusiasts. They're all part of that consumer franchise, and believe it or not, it was built one person at a time over 40 years. And this is the 40th anniversary. And it gives me goosebumps to actually have been around that long with them. I want to thank you all for coming, just like we did here, but we've got another little story to tell you.
Yeah. So, and I mean, first of all, when he opens his eyes and says it's all your fault, you have to think, wow, with friends like this, who needs enemies, right?
Yeah.
Like,
the thing of it is when he said it was all my fault, I knew it wasn't. He was certain it was.
I'll just say yes and move on at that point.
Yeah, exactly. I could have offered him something like a drink of water, but his lips were all like this.
A little puffy. So let's jump in the DeLorean and go back 2 years to 1987 and Sebring, Halloween time. What's up with that?
I'm going to start it, and then I'm going to turn it over to these two. Again, Liz and I are partners up in the 12 Hours of Sebring. Last race of the year, championship race, 1987. We are tied, dead even, with the Porsche factory team. Steve talked about Ferrari and some of the other teams that we've had to compete against over the years. After all those many, many hours of racing, 2 24-hour races, 12-hour races, 6-hour races, throughout the whole season, how could you possibly imagine you could go into the last race of the year and be tied? and a very formidable team. The Porsche team, the factory team, brought in extra cars, so we thought we better as well, so we had a third car. We had a great driving crew at that point in time. It was Steve and Rick Titus in one car. Now you're going to like this one. The second car was actually George Fulmer and Parnelli Jones. And the third car, which was always my favorite, were the two girls, Desiree Wilson and Lisa Caceres, and we teamed them up with Scott Pruitt. That's a pretty darn good driver's lineup. Race proceeds on out, and all we had to do was finish better than the Porsche, the one lead Porsche. Well, fortunately, that Porsche dropped out after about 3 hours, 4 hours. And so, well, this was clear sailing now. Steve's back in the car. We're coming to the end of the race. Less than an hour left. And all of a sudden, and I'm on the headset. There's 3 cars out there that we're running. And Steve comes on and says, the rear end's going out, the diff. Steve, I don't think so. We haven't lost the diff all year. And no, it's going out. And I said, well, nurse it, I can't. He said, I'm already in the pit lane. I said, I'm looking. I said, where in the hell are you? Well, he said, I'm right below you. Because Liz and I are elevated. And he's pulled over down there, and he stopped. And the thing is so hot, the rear end, that the little crystals that form around the steel are dropping off. And it's, oh, by the way, it's raining. Are dropping off into the wet, and you can actually see them glowing in the wet pavement. Steve gets out, sure that this thing is all over. We are not going to win the championship. He gets out of the car and starts walking down the pit lane. And meanwhile, the crew's mad at work. We've got a crew chief and a crew that is not going to give up. They've already got the car up in the air. They got the third member halfway out of the car. They got another third member already built right there. They're putting that thing back in the car, and he walks away. So I said to Bob, I said, better go see where he's going. We're going to need a driver here, and the only co-driver we could put in, because he was the only driver other than Steve on the car, was Rick Titus. And when you got to nurse that car around in the rain and it's not going to be quite 100%, Rick wouldn't be my first choice, but that was what we had left. So I'm going to turn this back over to Bob and Steve. They can kind of tell you what went on when they went for their little walk down the track at Sebring prior to when we did the finish.
So Steve's walking down. Fred yells at me, go find out where he's at. He's got to drive the car. So I'm chasing him. I said, Steve, where are you going? I don't know. Don't talk to me right now. I'm frustrated. I said, can I walk next to you? He said, yeah, if you shut up. So we're walking and walking, and we're walking. We're all the way down to the hairpin already, and I said, Fred's got a plan. We're putting a rear end in the car. And he goes, yeah, but it doesn't matter. We're gonna lose. We're gonna do this. And he turns around and looks at me, and he said, why am I walking with you? And it was like, well, because I'm here to bring you back and put you back in the car, correct?
Yeah, I think that some of this is true. So the bottom line is that, yes, the car broke, and we needed to finish the race, otherwise we were not going to win the championship. And we had to finish actually 6 or better, I see. And so Fred got the crew, and they changed the complete rear end out of the car and put in a brand new one. We put Rick Titus back in the car to put laps on it, and we were running to the end. We were then calculating here that we were looking, and this is Halloween night, and it's pitch black at Sebring. There's not a lot of lights at night there, and and there's on and off rain, and we realized that we're counting the cars that are in front of us on how many laps we have to go to unlap ourselves. And because we're running decent lap times now, but there's not enough race to get to the end on this to unlap ourselves. And we calculate that we can only get there to 7th, but we can't get to 6th. until we realize that the sixth place car is actually our car. It happens to be being driven by Parnelli Jones and George Fulmer. So we then decide, you know what we're going to do? We'll park the car. And we will have, Parnelli was driving at the time, have him come in and just park the car and get enough laps in to where we come in fifth and we win the championship. So that was pretty easy. So we go to Fred and tell Fred, call Parnelli in, tell him there's a problem with the car and that we need to bring him into the pit stop and just park the car. So Fred turns up and calls Parnelli. We'll never really know the full. Parnelli says that the radio never was working. If you know Parnelli Jones, I don't know that that's true, but Parnelli refused to come in on the pit stop, and he didn't see us, and the radio wasn't working. So then, well, we're deciding what the heck are we going to do? So we come up with the solution is we'll go to the SCCA and have them black flag our car because we tell them there's a major mechanical safety issue. They need to black flag the car so that he will see it and come in. And he goes around and they black flagged him and we go, yeah, he saw that. And, but he doesn't come in. And the next lap, he doesn't come in. And the next lap, he doesn't. And they're waving the black flag at him to get off the track, Parnelli, and he just ignores it. Meanwhile, we are using up the valuable time to unlap ourselves if we don't get him to stop on this. And we don't, again, I think he's not seeing it. So in desperation, I go gather a lot of lights, floodlights. I mean, we're talking big floodlights, a great big chalkboard that we write Parnelli in, and we literally run out to the edge of the track when he comes around, light up with all of these floodlights to tell Parnelli to come in. And we all come back and we say, yeah, I think he had to see that. I mean, it was like in daylight, yes. And so sure enough, it looks like he actually is going to come in because we have to get him in on this lap. Otherwise, there is not enough time to unlap ourselves to get that sixth position. And then we realize, oh shoot, our pits are on the outside of the start-finish line, so the pit in lap is going to count as another lap. So I tell our crew chief, Howard Comstock, I don't care what you have to do, you need to run down to the end of pit lane and stop Parnelli from crossing where the start-finish line is. And so Howard runs on down to him in the, at night, and Howard does the only thing that you could possibly do in pit lane when you have a hot car coming down. Howard throws himself on the hood of the car, and over the windshield, Parnelli couldn't see, and Parnelli stops about 10 feet from start finish in the pit lane there on doing this. The irony of that, he actually stopped in the pit box of where the Porsche team that we had to beat is where he ended up, and he goes, what did I do, kill somebody or whatever? And we told George Fulmer, go down and you're going to have to talk to Parnelli because he's going to be really upset over the fact of us getting. But as it turned out, we were able to, and we had calculated with the help of my wife, who was timing on this, or was accurate, to where we were able to get the extra lap in before the end of the race to get that extra lap that moved us from 7th place into 6th place on this. And we realized, wow, we actually were able to do that. At the same token, we were paying attention to the girls' car, to Desiree and Lisa, and we didn't realize Well, they were in contention to win the damn race on this, and we told Desiree that that Porsche in front of you, you need to get that. And she passed the Porsche in the last corner of the last lap, ended up winning the race for us. And then we were able to cross with Rick driving to get us in sixth spot, and we ended up winning the championship on Halloween night. And that was unbelievable.
That is a very, very cool story. And do you have something to add, Fred?
I always have something to add. You just said that.
He
for me.
did,
Yeah.
he did, yes.
Well, as he said earlier, it's like Jimmy Buffett says. It's a semi-true story. Some of it's true, some of it I made up, and I can't remember the rest. But we've got everybody here. Liz was a big part of this. Great story. I don't have anything to add.
I would just like to thank, again, Carlisle Events, working with Ken Appel, and then obviously working with Greg Wackett, who put together a great group of people. I hope you're all here, that helped us actually put together our display for the thing. Thank you immensely. I'd still be sitting in the trailer if it weren't for you.
Thank you guys very, very much. Round of applause for our esteemed panel, Mr. Steve Saleen, Mr. Bob Smith, and Mr. Fred Blum. Gentlemen, thank you very much.